Imagine walking into the hospital seeking medical care only to become trapped in a nightmare where your body is no longer your own. What would you do if doctors and laws decided your medical fate, stripping you and your loved ones of the right to choose? That's exactly what happened to Adriana Smith, a pregnant Black woman in Georgia whose heartbreaking experience shines a chilling spotlight on today's troubling collision between medical ethics, racial injustice, and patient autonomy. Her story is not isolated. It is a modern-day chapter in America's dark legacy of exploiting Black individuals through non-consensual medical experimentation, exploitation fueled by racism, prejudice, and legal neglect. So join us today while we discuss the dark history of medical apartheid. And if you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemichistory.com. If you like audio-only episodes, you can find my podcast, One My Black History, wherever you get your podcasts. But without further ado, let's get started. February 2025, in Metro Atlanta, a pregnant Black woman named Adriana Smith walked into the hospital complaining of severe headaches, a simple medical visit that unexpectedly spiraled into a tragedy. Shortly thereafter, Adriana was declared brain dead. Her grieving and heartbroken family sought dignity and a peaceful goodbye, but Georgia's Restrictive Life Act, a strict anti-abortion law, created a legal maze that trapped her lifeless body in perpetual medical imprisonment. Forced by legal confusion to stay connected to life-supporting machines against her family's wishes, Adriana's silent heartbeat continued beating purely as a medical necessity to keep her unborn child alive at all costs. 4 agonizing months later, June 13th, 2025, Adriana's son Chance entered the world prematurely due to an emergency cesarean. At just 1 pound, 13 ounces, Chance's fragile frame became a symbol of hope and tragedy in equal measure. His first cries echoed within a modern-day medical paradox. Just 4 days later, on June 17th, Adriana's machines were switched off, ending a horrifying chapter of involuntary medical conscription. Adriana's mother, April Newkirk, weighed down by grief, voiced what countless Black families have felt historically. This decision should have been left to us. And Adriana's story quickly resonated across the nation, not merely as an isolated instance, but a painful echo of historical wrongs and contemporary reminder of how frequently Black bodies, particularly those of Black women, become unwilling instruments in the relentless pursuit of medical and political agendas. Adriana's ordeal forms part of an entrenched historical pattern known as medical apartheid. It is a systemic abuse of Black bodies for scientific, economic, and political gain. From slavery to the present day, the shadows of American medical history reveals thousands of nameless, voiceless Black individuals whose dignity and autonomy were stripped away, and their bodies were used as disposable material for experimentation and medical advancement. One prominent figure who starkly embodies this medical exploitation rooted in historical racism is Dr. J. Marion Sims. Often championed as the father of modern gynecology, Sims' celebrated title masks the devastating reality. His landmark experiments were built on torment and exploitation of enslaved Black women. Between 1845 and 1849, Sims conducted agonizing, unethical medical procedures on enslaved women, named Archer, Lucy, and Betsy, among others. These women, stripped away of any right to consent or refused because of their status, became subjects of ruthless quests for professional acclaim. Sims performed dozens of surgeries without anesthesia, forcing these women to endure unimaginable pain. Archer alone was operated on more than 30 times. Sims' cruelty was justified and even normalized through racial pseudoscience, prevalent among medical professionals at the time, who falsely asserted that Black people felt pain less intensely than white individuals. Shockingly, some physicians went so far as to compare Black individuals' capacity to feel pain to animals, claiming that they could endure operations with the same insensitivity as dogs or rabbits. This dehumanizing racism freed doctors like Sims from moral accountability, enabling systemic abuse in the name of medical progress. At the heart of Sims' experimentation were problematic childbirth-related vestibular-vaginal fistulas, conditions tragically common among enslaved women due to forced labor and neglected medical care. He confined these women into a crude hospital behind his Alabama home, where he conducted repeated, humiliating examinations and surgeries for public display. After refining his methods through the torture of black women, he introduced anesthesia and safely performed these procedures on white patients. Despite these horrific abuses, Sims achieved immense professional fame, eventually serving as president of the American Medical Association. His legacy thus illustrates the exploitation and suffering of black bodies for medical advancement, professional achievement, and profit. Throughout the 20th century, the exploitation of black bodies would continue within America's medical system. It was not only commonplace, but it was deeply ingrained, culminating in one of the most notorious abuses of trust, the Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment, conducted between 1932 and 1972 by the Public Health Service and the Tuskegee Institute in Macon County, Alabama. It was an unethical experiment performed on hundreds of unsuspecting black men. Researchers deceived almost 400 black men infected with syphilis and another 200 without the disease, claiming to offer free medical care for the vague condition of bad blood. In reality, officials intentionally intended on only observing the untreated progress of syphilis, deliberately withholding effective medical treatment that could have saved their lives. This injustice was rooted in the racist stereotype and scientifically unfounded belief that syphilis affected black people differently and that black Americans were indifferent to their own health. Such prejudice paved the way for these cruel experiments to exist. From the study's very beginning in the 1930s, effective syphilis treatments did exist. First, the arsenic-based medicines, and later penicillin after 1947. Yet, health officials intentionally denied participants life-saving therapies and actively interfered with the men when they attempted to obtain medical care elsewhere, preserving their unethical research over patient lives. Exploiting these men's poverty, isolation, and limited access to medical care, officials gained their trust through promises of free medical appointments, transportation, meals, and funeral expenses. Painful procedures such as spinal taps were falsely advertised as special treatments, manipulating consent and reducing patients to mere living cadavers. The human toll was enormous. 28 men died directly from untreated syphilis, and another 100 succumbed to related illnesses. At least 40 wives and 19 children suffered infections due to untreated disease transmission. Despite internal criticism, the experiment continued unchecked until whistleblower Peter Buxom exposed it publicly to the Associated Press in 1972. The Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment left profound scars and reinforced a deep mistrust in medical establishments among black communities. This fear and mistrust is not irrational, but rather a historically rooted response to generation of systemic medical abuse and disregard for black lives. Yet, alongside these openly devastating tragedies woven into America's medical history, quieter injustices hold their place, subtle yet deeply harmful acts whose violence still echoes today. Among these stands the story of Henrietta Alax, a black woman who unknowingly altered the course of medical history. Her experience vividly uncovers a disturbing truth: the exploitation of black bodies for medical science without consent, acknowledgement, or compensation. Born Adriana Pleasant in 1920 in Roanoke, Virginia, Henrietta Alax grew up to become a tobacco farmer, a wife, and a mother. In January of 1951, at just 30, she went to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, the only hospital in the area that treated black patients at the time with troubling symptoms. Doctors diagnosed her with an aggressive form of cervical cancer. In line with common medical practice then, Henrietta received radium treatments, and unknowingly to her, researchers collected tissue from her cervix of both cancerous and healthy tissue without her consent, which was common practice at the time, particularly among black patients. Henrietta's cancer cells displayed remarkable properties. They reproduced indefinitely in a laboratory, doubling every single day, becoming the first immortal cell line, and these cells became known as HeLa after the first two letters of her first name and her last name, effectively obscuring her identity and humanity while immortalizing her cells. As cancer cells spread throughout her body, Henrietta tragically died October 4th, 1951, at just 31 years old. Yet her cells lived on, revolutionizing medicine. In 1954, Jonas Sachs used HeLa cells to develop a polio vaccine. Later, HeLa cells contributed enormously to medical breakthroughs through gene mapping, cancer research, radiation studies, cosmetic testing, and more recently, COVID-19 vaccine development. In 1951, HeLa became the first successfully cloned human cell line, transforming biological research worldwide. Meanwhile, Henrietta's family remained unaware of the developments for decades. It was not until 1975, over 2 decades after Henrietta's death, that her family accidentally uncovered that her cells were still alive, globally distributed, and widely commercialized. Later, they faced further injustice when in the 1980s, researchers published Henrietta's family medical records without their consent. Despite millions earned commercially through HeLa cells, neither Henrietta nor her family ever received any compensation. Johns Hopkins maintains that they never profited directly from the HeLa cell line through it freely distributed these cells globally for research. It was only recently that a measure of justice emerged. In 2021, Henrietta Alax estate sued biomedical giant Thermo Fisher Scientific for profits made from HeLa cells without their consent, resulting in a landmark settlement in 2023. These historic cases illustrate the persistent objectification and exploitation of Black lives, highlighting the ongoing systemic racism, racial bias, and power imbalances when it comes to Black people and medical research. This brings us full circle back to Adrianas Smith's story, where politics and legislation once again strip away autonomy from Black families, echoing centuries of disregard and abuse. Adrianas' family, like the members of the Tuskegee Experiment or Henrietta Alax, found themselves stripped of agency, forced to witness their loved ones' bodies reduced to a site of political maneuvering and clinical trespass. Her very presence made a modern example of lingering historical racism. Yet, within this heartbreak emerges a bit of resilience worth celebrating. Chance Smith's tiny newborn is now fighting for his life in a neonatal intensive care unit, and he presents a ironic yet powerful emblem of survival and defiance against generations of exploitation. Adriana's case has triggered critical conversations concerning medical ethics, racial justice, and legislation reform, and it propels forward a pressing call to action demanding an unequivocal end to medical apartheid. Not simply apologies or symbolic gestures, but solid, accountable legislative reform. Moving forward, unequivocal health practices must include strict ethical oversight and genuine informed consent measures with intentional institutional accountability. Black scientists, health professionals, and community advocates insist that medical care and advancements earned medically through Black suffering must be reallocated to the communities that they have harmed the most. Indeed, Adrianas Smith's story demands recognition that past harms are not abstract. They shape experiences of Black patients facing mistrust, trauma, and healthcare disparities today. Doing justice to Adriana, Chance, and those like them involves acknowledging Black history candidly, reconciling in honesty with this legacy, and ensuring that future medical decisions will never again subjugate humanity to politics, prejudice, and profit. Thank you. This has been One My Black History, and this was the dark history of medical apartheid. If you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemyhistory.com. If you like audio-only episodes, you can find my podcast, One My Black History, wherever you get your podcasts. I would like to thank all my financial contributors. I love you all. Without you, none of this could be possible. And peace.